Welcome everyone to the Kent City Council workshop. Today is Tuesday, September 15th, 2020. This is a remote meeting due to the COVID-19 emergency and by order of the governor. Welcome to anyone that's watching us today on Kent TV 21, the Facebook channel, City of Kent, and the YouTube Kent TV 21 channel, and also anyone that's calling in today. So welcome. We have 2 items on our workshop agenda. So let's go ahead and get started with the first one. I'd like to welcome Kelly Peterson to talk about the Sound Transit Federal Way Link Extension Update. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you very much. Kim, will you go to the very first slide, please? Good evening. My name is Kelly Peterson. I'm the liaison to Sound Transit for the City of Kent for the Federal Way Link Extension Project. We last came to council workshop in April of this year and gave a briefing at that time. And there's been a lot of activity that's happened since then, both in the office from a permitting standpoint as well as construction in the field. So as we go through these first slides, some of them you've seen before, but I think it's good background for our listening audience this evening. So next slide, please, Kim. The Federal Way Link extension, which is illustrated on the left there with the purple arrows, is a part of the Sound Transit System expansion for light rail. Currently, light rail ends at Angle Lake, just south of the airport, and this project will extend the light rail down to Federal Way. Sound Transit is also working, it's in the planning phases of the next segment, which is the Tacoma Dome Link extension. It will extend it from the southern end of the Federal Way Link extension down to Tacoma. Next slide, please. When the Federal Way Link extension is completed, it will add about 8 miles of light rail track. It will include 3 stations, 3 stations and 3 garages, 2 of which are in Kent, located at Kent Des Moines Station between SR 99 or Pacific Highway and 30th Avenue, just south of Kent Des Moines Road, as well as the 272nd Station or Star Lake Station, which is going to be located on the top of the old Star Lake Park and Ride, which has been closed since March. And the last station will be down at the Federal Way Transit Center, just across the street from the mall. When service opens in 2024, Sound Transit anticipates over 36,000 riders per day. Next slide, please. This project has been, there's been a lot of work on this project over the years. Planning started back in 2012, and we are currently in the design phase. This is a design build project, so it's going to be designed as the contractor is working on constructing the project. So we're in both the design and the build phase right now. The project will be done in 2024 when service starts. Next slide. So this is a slide that we showed you back in April, and it's slightly modified. Back in April, we explained that the project includes 3 segments. There's segment 1, segment 2, and segment 3. Segment 1, the very southern part, is located within the city of Kent, down to 240th. Segment 2 extends from 240th, which is just north of Lowe's, all the way down to 272nd Street, where the Star Lake Station is. And then the third segment is all within the city of Federal Way. The contractor broke out all these different packages, and each of these packages that you see listed here is essentially like a separate application that comes in the door. But what we need to do is we need to make sure that these are all married together, they blend together, and they work cohesively. And then there's corridor-wide packages, which is it's a different package which extends all the way across the entire corridor. The only exception there is the Kent mitigation and restoration for wetland impacts. So the city of Kent needed to have that done and in place, approved prior to all the other stuff coming in from a permitting standpoint. So we made sure that we had the appropriate mitigation measures. One thing I do want to point out is as these packages are issued, for example, package S201 there in segment 2, that structure B, which we're going to be talking about tonight, just because we've issued the package or the permits for that work, there are going to be additional permitting that needs to be completed as we identify some changes that need to be done in the field to make sure everything marries up. So even though major permitting will be done in February of 2021, there'll be some additional work that still needs to be done from a permitting standpoint. And again, just a reminder, there's a number of different permits that could be in each package, anywhere from 1 to over 20 permits, depending on the specific work that's being done. Next slide, please. So since May, one of the biggest things that we've done is the permitting. So for each package that you just saw there, there's 4 levels. There's the 30% review, the 60% review, the 90, 100% review, and then the final plans that get issued for construction. I'm happy to tell you that all the 30 and 60% review has been completed. So we're getting towards the end. We're really getting into the details, making sure that things match up. We're at kind of that final stretch, and it's a lot of work. There's needless to say, it's an orchestra of people doing the work to make sure things get completed. As comments are made, we do comment resolution. We may submit when we submit a comment, the contractor responds to it, and everything is done electronically. And our staff has been working their tails off on this. To complete this work, since May of last year, we've had weekly permitting meetings as well as task force meetings for specific topics such as drainage task force or the stations in the garages or utilities. We have technical meetings if there's a real specific issue that we need to address. It's happened several times. And then even going out in the field, we've worked around COVID, going out in the field and resolving issues. We're currently in the peak of permitting, but we're going to be wrapping that up, the heavy permitting, by February of next year. This is a design build process, and so we will continue that as we move forward. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get into some of the fun stuff, some of the things that we've done. The images that you see on the right, those are some images. That's what's coming. That's what we showed you back in April. But before we get to those really pretty things coming out of the ground, we have a lot of other work that needs to be done. So, of course, the permitting, the demolition at KDM station is complete. Contaminated soil has been removed. Utility relocation, we're in the middle of that right now. The contractor is working on that, as well as many of the utility providers. They're out there getting their work done. Some PSC transmission poles needed to be replaced or relocated. I'll show you those. Staging area is ready to go, and then the guideway column mock-up is complete. And what I mean by that is the contract requires the contractor to build a mock-up column, and that has been completed. They're done with that. TESC stands for Temporary Erosion and Sediment Control, and I put that on there 3 times, and that was very intentional. You know, we got a little rain today. I know everybody's hoping for more rain and then some sunshine so we can see the blue skies. But the erosion and sediment control in this project is a very, very important element. It's very important to us. It's very important to protect our stormwater system and our resources, and it's a mandate of state and federal laws. As we have a lot of area that's going to be opened up during the winter season, making sure that we have good erosion and sediment control in place is paramount, and we are working on that. We have weekly meetings with Sound Transit, making sure everything's in place and ready to go, and they are getting ready for the wet season, which is great. Next slide, please. So this is an image to show you that we showed you back in April. The Federal Link extension alignment is the purplish line that goes through there. That's the approximate location. Every orange polygon that you see there is a structure that has been demolished. There was over 70 structures in the KDM station area, and this has all been completed. The next slide that you see is from Google Earth, and this shows you just kind of the impact of what that is. And everything within that yellow area, that has all been removed. That was all done through the permits, and they got that done this year. So this gives you an idea of what it looked like before. We have 30th Avenue South kind of going down right in the middle of the construction area, Pacific Highway and I-5 off to the left. Now, as we go to the next slide, I love this image, by the way. This is a drone image taken by Kent staff, and we'll be doing this periodically through the project. You can see 30th Avenue South there. We've got I-5 off to the east, and we are looking south here, SR 99 on the right. This shows you what it looked like on August 28th, and I'm going to use this slide to kind of build through a few things so you can get a picture of what's coming. So, Kim, if you go to the next slide, we transposed the new streets that are going to be on here for the city, 238, 236, and 234. Those are going to be the new city streets that we've talked about. The yellow dashed line is the approximate location of the Federal Link extension. The blue squares are the TOD sites, the transit-oriented development that the city and Sound Transit will be working on together to market. The yellow squares are where the station will be, and then the green square is the Kent Des Moines garage. Now, if we go to the next slide, I want to start explaining to you some of the things that are happening out there and what these things are on the ground. So we're going to start at the joint use utility trench. We're going to work our way kind of counterclockwise here. So the first thing is the joint use utility trench. There's going to be a guideway. I talked about structure B, which is the elevated guideway between Kent Des Moines Road and the Midway landfill. The guideway or the track will be elevated and they'll be up off the ground. In order to do that, they have to drill these big, huge shafts into the ground, put columns on there, and the guideway will be built on top of that. Before they do that work, the utilities have to be relocated, and that's what's happening out there today. So the joint use utility trench is down in the bottom there. That is located on the east side of 30th. But one of the things we negotiate with Sound Transit and Kiewit is that in 5 locations, utilities will be pulled across the street, so when the properties on the east side develop, we don't have to tear up the roads. Our goal is to minimize impacts to those roads as much as possible. So as we work our way counterclockwise, we have the station excavation. You see those 2 holes in the ground. Those are excavated, ready to start the station, which is currently scheduled to start in January of 2021. Right between those 2 holes, that's where 236 is going to go, and it's going to extend to the east where the parking garage will be, and then back to the west into the city of Des Moines. The next one is a casing, and so when they start drilling those shafts, that's going to be a casing for those shafts. So that is basically one big pipe. And Kim, if you go back to where the casing is, and look just above that, there is a white SUV there. Use that for kind of size comparison. That thing can drive right inside of that casing. That thing is pretty massive. Continuing moving counterclockwise in the southwest corner, right next to SR99, that is where the mock-up column and cap are. That is completed. If you're up there, you drive by it, you can see what that's going to look like. Of course, we have the Midway landfill. I wanted to highlight that just for perspective purposes. The landfill excavation, we'll talk about that a little bit. We did talk about that in April, but the contractor is working on that. That's all the way across the face of I-5. If you drive on I-5 going southbound, you'll see that work taking place. Where it says guideway, there is looks like a big gravel road there, and that's essentially what it is right now, but that's right where the guideway is going to be located behind the Lowe's building. And then the last 2 items that we have there is the Kent Pond. The Kent Pond looks white. That's because there's a liner in there right now. And that is going to be a pond that we own. That's going to take stormwater from 238th, 236, 234th, and 30th. Those are all city streets, and so we'll have one pond. And then the last item there, it's kind of hard to tell, but there actually is a hole that's dug there. That's going to be the Sound Transit pond, and they were excavating that, getting ready for the winter. That Sound Transit pond is going to take stormwater from the parking garage, from the station, the plaza, and the plaza underneath the light rail station, as well as part of the guideway. And then the last thing that's just happened to be here, it was kind of a coincidence, is the transmission poles. And if you see transmission poles going to 2 arrows, the upper arrow, you can see the large vertical orangish item. That is actually a crane, and they are standing up one of those transmission poles. So I thought that was really pretty interesting. So if we go to the next slide, this is, I guess it's not the most attractive picture, but when we're done, when you see this perspective, it's going to be very different. The transmission poles, those are installed. You can see the wheels up there where the arrow is pointing, but they have run the new lines. The old transmission lines are down. Those are 115 kilovolts, and down here in the Kent area, those cannot be put underground. They have to be above ground. The utility poles on the right, those will eventually be removed once all the other utilities are in and construction continues. Next slide, please. This is the joint use utility trench located towards the north end of 30th, just south of 240th. Lowe's is up there in the upper right-hand corner, in the upper edge of the photo. But within this utility trench, you've got gas, you've got comms, you've got power, all the dry utilities in this trench. Next slide, please. So out in the contractor yard, they are putting together these rebar cages for the columns for structure B. So these are out there right now. They are actually going to start drilling next week, and they're going to start building these shafts, and they're going to be able to start coming out of the ground, which for me is exciting. You know, we've been working on this a long time, having something come out of the ground. That's what we've been hoping for. So this is the rebar cages for the structures. Next slide, please. This next slide is the casings. This is what you saw earlier. These are about I think about 12 foot in diameter. These things are really pretty massive. So these are out on site right now. Next slide, please. And this is a photo looking south behind Lowe's. This looks very, very different than it did a couple of months ago. When you look at this, you think this is extremely wide. It's like, why is it so wide? Well, one of the things that they have to do is they've got to get the big drilling rigs in there. They'll come in, they'll be drilling these shafts, and they're moving. This road heads out towards I-5, and so they'll be working their way as they go, and they still need to get around it. Some of the erosion and sediment control items, you got your silt fence on the left. They got good cover on the road. It's not a dirt road. They actually have a big mound of wood product there, wood chips that they can use if they need to. So they're ready to go. Pretty pleased with that. Next slide, please. As we move south, so we're moving south in the project, this is the Midway landfill removal. You've seen this slide before back in April. The yellow is the Federal Link extension, the guideway. The blue is going to be a new auxiliary lane with the SR 509 project, and the orange dashed line is the current work area. They've started in the south, working their way north. They're approximately 2/3 of the way done right now. Right now what they're doing is they are just moving the landfill waste that is needed for the Federal Link extension project. Next year they'll come back in and remove the rest of it that goes all the way up to I-5. They don't want to do it over the winter time because they have to control stormwater, so I think it's a very good decision. But they anticipate being done with the waste removal for this year, the first week in October or so. Next slide, please. This is a slide that gives you that cross-section of the landfill right in the middle where you see Sound Transit across the top. That's where the landfill waste is going to be removed. This was originally going to be on columns. Now they're going to be backfilling it, and the guideway will be at grade. Next slide, please, Kim. In the Kent Station area, it's lagging behind KDM, not from a scheduling or not from that they're behind in their work. It's just that they're starting at Kent Des Moines Station first. And then Star Lake is coming back behind it. So permitting is ongoing. The demolition is complete. There was much fewer structures to demolish. Clearing and grading, though, has begun, and it's really just started. Utility relocation is going to be happening pretty soon. And again, erosion and sediment control is paramount on this project. The next slide shows you a picture from this morning. It's not the best photo, but it's kind of what we could get right there. And this is looking back towards I-5. You can see the trucks. This is going to be another one when this project is done. I want to use this as a slide where I can show you what it looked like from the start when grading. Please, next slide, please. We have, if you look closely in the image behind you, that is a gentleman with the orange vest on. It's Jefferson Rose. We worked very closely with him throughout this project. He's done a really good job reaching out to the community. Sound Transit has started what's called a community outreach action log. It's the COL log, where they log complaints and status of the complaints. You know, it's interesting too that the city of Kent hasn't had a whole lot of them. Sometimes these items that end up on there are things that we need to take action on, we the city need to take action on, or something that a resident has a concern about. But we haven't had a ton, but we do expect more to occur as construction expands. There is a Federal Link Extension Project hotline. It's available 24 hours a day. Anybody has any concerns, they can use that hotline, and it will get to them. Next slide, please. Sound Transit has what's called the STR program, and part of the art that is going to be happening on this project is murals that will be installed around the construction fence. So starting next month, 58 murals will be installed around the construction fence at Kent Des Moines Station. There's 8 artists who live and work within close proximity to the corridor. The artwork will be in place for 3 years, and Sound Transit will be maintaining that artwork. And this is some of the examples of the 58. Our Arts Commission is aware. Cecilia De Leon, my understanding, she has some other artwork here in the city of Kent. So be looking for that next month around Kent Des Moines Station on the construction fence. Next slide, please. So moving forward, we have the heavy permitting through 2021. Utilities will be finished this year near Kent Des Moines Station, and they'll begin Structure B, the rebar cages, the drilling for the column shaft, and they're going to start the cap work on the columns in October. They'll wrap up for the year removing landfill waste at Midway landfill. More clearing and grading will be happening down at Star Lake, and then looking at it from a bigger perspective, heavy construction is going to be between 2020 and 23. They'll test for a year, and then revenue services is scheduled to begin in 2024. Next slide, please. So COVID has been a challenge for, I think, every aspect of our lives. Federal Link Extension is definitely included in that. I do want to give a shout out to your staff. Working with these folks every day, I've been really, really happy with how they've worked. They've been very dedicated. They're coming up, figuring out ways to solve problems in a challenging environment and being creative. And it's helped us keep on schedule, and that's been really good. This includes people from economic and community development, public works engineering, public works ops, permit center, the law has been involved, planning. Everybody has really, really been really good, and I really appreciate that. And I wanted to give a shout out to them, make sure that you heard that. Next slide, please. And the last slide that I have for you is not Federal Link Extension related, but it's related to the operations and maintenance facility. So originally, the draft EIS was supposed to be out in November of this year. We heard from Sound Transit staff that that is pushed back to the first quarter of 2021. That EIS is going to analyze the 3 sites, which includes the Midway landfill and the 2 sites in Federal Way. And the opening date will likely be pushed back from 2025 to sometime between 2026 and 2028. So as that project moves forward, you'll be hearing from Kent staff. It may be somebody else, but you'll be hearing from Kent staff on that, and that will be presented to you, and the city will certainly be making comments on the EIS. That's my presentation. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great presentation, Kelly. Councilmember Boyce, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I want to say, Kelly, I recall when the mayor first appointed you to this position, and I tell you, you have done a stellar job. I know you reach out to your peers that have been helping you, but you've been guiding the ship, and this is one smooth project. I mean, just really amazing. So I want to thank you personally for your leadership. I do have a couple of questions with that said. One is around the Sound Transit Pond. I know we got the Kent Pond and the Sound Transit Pond. So will Sound Transit be responsible for maintaining that pond?
Sound Transit will be responsible for maintaining their pond, and we will be responsible for maintaining our pond.
Then my other question is, I'm surprised at the service schedule still 2024 with everything's going on and the COVID and all this stuff here. So we still feel pretty good about the service date 2024.
I haven't heard anything from Sound Transit yet. If I hear anything different, I will let you guys know as soon as possible.
Okay, and then my other question is around the utility poles that you're replacing on the left-hand side of the road. I'm assuming, are they going to be having lights and stuff around the new utility poles, so for visibility and so on?
Not on the utility poles, but there will be street lights around Kent Des Moines Station. And in fact, one of the things that was written into the development agreement, the planning department worked on this a few years ago. Around the Kent Des Moines Station, we'll have similar street lights that's down on the Meet Me on Meeker project.
Oh, okay.
So yes, there will be street lighting in there. We actually have a meeting on it later this week, and then Sound Transit will also have lighting on their property as well.
Okay, thank you. And once again, really, I just from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your leadership. This has really been a very smooth project. I mean, maybe there's a lot of stuff going behind the scene that we don't see, but for what you present to us, it looked pretty smooth. So thanks a lot. Appreciate your leadership.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you, Madam President. Hi, Kelly. So with the permitting, I know that you said 60 days reviews are complete. Are we up to date as far as we're not lagging behind where we should be with that? I was thinking COVID-19 also. So with, are we where Sound Transit can keep moving right along?
Absolutely, yes. We have a number of tools that we use to make sure that we're staying on track. We talk to our folks to see what they need in order to stay on track. We have not held the project from a permitting standpoint up at all. Our staff's been really great.
Good. When in October is the art going to be put up?
They're trying for early October, but I will stay in touch with that. I know you had a question for Derek Matheson today. As they get a little bit closer, I'll send you an email and let you know when that's coming.
Thank you. And then the final question, as far as the TOD, I know it's early, but have you had calls from any people who are interested in any of that property?
I have not, but Haley Bonstill and Bill Ellis, I know that they did have a meeting with Sound Transit. That's probably the only piece as far as right now that I'm not taking the lead on, because that's more economic development. And Haley and Bill are working on that, but I will check with Haley and Bill and see if there's anything on that, and I can certainly get back to you.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for Kelly? Kelly, another great presentation. I especially like to see the before and after pictures and the drone pictures, because I think it really puts into perspective how much work is really being done. And from your last report, it seems like nothing has really slowed you guys down. So great job. Keep going.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you. All right, moving on in our agenda. Up next, we have the Transportation Master Plan Financial Plan. So I'm going to welcome April.
I am trying to figure out how to share my screen. Give me 1 second. Many apologies. We practiced it earlier as well, and it's not working. There it goes. All right, let me know if you can see it, please.
We can see it. Go ahead, welcome.
Well, I am April Delchamps. I'm the Senior Transportation Planner in Public Works. Thank you for having me tonight. Also on the line tonight is Kendra Breland and Emily Alice Gearhart with Fehr Peers Consultants on board. So tonight I'm here to provide an update on 3 aspects of the Transportation Master Plan. First, I want to update you on the public outreach effort. Second, I want to detail the progress on project development. And last, I want to discuss the TMP financial plan, specifically the capital project funding sources. The outreach efforts officially started the week of August 17th. Outreach was originally scheduled to close on September 14th, so yesterday, but the close date was extended to September 21st to facilitate social media and partnership push to reach more populations, especially equity populations. Equity was at the forefront of the outreach campaign. Due to COVID, staff sought to engage with underserved populations via virtual, print, location, and partnership strategies. An updated fact sheet was distributed online and via social media. In fact, Josh Mosberg in communication helped me get an ad out to target those communities today. Those fact sheets were translated into Somali, Vietnamese, Ukraine, and Spanish. And I'm going to turn the presentation over to Kendra and Emily Alice.
All right, thanks, April. Hi, everyone. This is Emily Alice Gearhart with Fehr Peers. Good evening. It's great to see some of your faces. Looking forward to seeing you again in person. So I wanted to touch on our outreach strategy and timeline. So when we last met with you, I believe it was the end of July, and we quickly kicked into gear to advance our outreach strategy. What we have on your screen now is our outreach timeline, which has 3 main steps, which we'll detail in a moment. But we really focused on, in our first wave, emailing as many people as we could get a hold of and get their email addresses who were willing participants. And followed up with phone calls to as many as possible. We also focused on flyering. So we'll show you photos of that in a moment, but that was our next phase once we had some of our online materials ready to go for folks to review. And then, of course, as April mentioned, we are in the thick of our social media blasts. We used some paid advertising on Facebook, which was very successful in increasing the number of engagement that we received. But they overall fall into 5 categories, which are the website, in-person locations, online, virtual, and print. And throughout this process, partnerships are a key strategy to engage with as many people as possible in a meaningful way in this unprecedented time. So next slide, please. So our website, so if you haven't already, please take a moment after this meeting to check out kenttmp.com. There you will find the fact sheets that April just mentioned in 5 languages, as well as our engagement tools. So those include our online web map. So here's just a quick screenshot of our online web map. What you can do is hover over each corridor, or what I call a pin, but it's a point here. It's an intersection improvement, or there are a few railroad grade separations identified as potential projects. And then participants have the option of upvoting some of their favorite projects and including comments if they have any questions, concerns, additions, things like that. So we're able to get a sense of which projects are rising to the top and what have we missed. What is an oversight on our part? What are things that we wouldn't know until we asked the community who knows their streets better than we do. So in addition to the web map, we also have an online survey, which focuses on each sub area of the city. As we've shown before, we're trying to make it a less overwhelming list of the 37 projects by walking through each geographic area of the city. So again, participants have the option of voting for their favorites and letting us know their comments. And all of this is summarized in a few handy dandy brochures and project description packets. So, as we're still in the middle of the outreach push, I would give a shameless plug. If you have anyone we haven't tapped yet, please let April or myself know. We'd be happy to provide those materials. And as we'll mention in a moment, we also printed off posters and postcards to post around the city and distribute around the city. So with that, next slide, please. Great. So here's one of my favorite pictures. You can see April hard at work. When is she not? Posting flyers and posters around the city. So the project team visited 20 community grocery stores. And once again, it's been at the front of our minds of how can we reach traditionally underserved populations and communities. And one place, that is still very important in the pandemic that we can count on people visiting our grocery stores. And so, we didn't want to just go to Safeway and be another flyer. We wanted to focus on some ethnic specific grocery stores and community grocery stores where we could post a flyer and hope to grab some attention. So we also focused on parks and trails, also very popular during the pandemic. So visiting 13 locations, including a few on your screen. Next slide, please. Social media. So there were a few blasts through the eConnect bulletin. So you can see just a screenshot on the right of how we were messaging the request for feedback. And some of this imagery, multimedia just did a phenomenal job of getting some eye-catchy graphics to try to get as much feedback as possible. So as you can see here, we've also been utilizing Facebook with 2 paid ads, which were able to boost some of the numbers on our surveys. And our second ad was focused on the translated materials for equity populations. So in addition to Facebook, of course, we were utilizing the City of Kent staff for helping us post on Instagram and Twitter about twice a week.
So one note on this one, that first eConnect bulletin actually went out in late August. My apologies for the date error.
Good catch. Thanks, April. Next slide. Okay, so partnerships and interviews, as we mentioned, this is very important right now. We can't have the same level of engagement through in-person conversations, through pop-ups as much as we would like to. So we need to rely on partnerships. So we did email blasts to advocacy and fellowship organizations, including the groups that members of council had suggested. So thank you for your inputs. We also, so that was, focusing on some Black-owned businesses, some neighborhood groups, community-based organizations, things like that. And we're continuing our email blasts, trying to reach populations like apartment complexes, and continuing to follow up with phone calls, just really trying to get the word out there and get a sense of the reaction to the proposed project list. So in addition, we've sent emails to members from 50 neighborhood councils, and April has attended a few meetings, virtual meetings, of course, through groups from the city, like the Cultural Communities Board, KBAB, the Land Use and Planning Board. Of course, we're connecting and relying on support from our TMP Transportation Advisory Board, Parks and Rec Commission, and the Human Services Commission. We're still waiting to hear if we can outreach to them in their groups. Next slide, please. Okay, so what have we heard? Very important. We have got about just over 500 upvotes. So with our web map, this of course is hard to tell, who is doing the upvoting, how many unique visitors we're receiving on that. But what we're seeing is some of our Southeast Hill projects and our Northeast Hill projects rising to the top. I think this is relatively straightforward and understandable, given, how many people in the city live in the East Hill. What we're seeing is consistent across different avenues, but we also have that online survey, which we mentioned, which has about 230 responses. So a little different. We've been using some different strategies to get different groups with either tool. So with our online survey, we're seeing the 132nd Ave corridor is consistent across both tools, as well as the Kent Canley Road has been rising to the top in Central. So East Hill, downtown projects, we're starting to get that feedback. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, April.
Perfect. And I'm going to add just a little bit of detail here. I could have added a lot more words to this slide, but I wanted to be able to show what we were hearing for more of the quantitative sources. In addition, I've done quite a few interviews and I'm answering emails. There's a dedicated email address for the TMP at tmp@kentwa.gov. And so I'm getting a lot of comments on that avenue as well and responses back from some of the email blast. So that kind of information, all of that, plus what we're hearing in the survey and the web map will be compiled and we'll be coming back to you to give you a summary of everything that we heard from all of the many sources that we're using. So one of the great updates today is we are in the home stretches for project development. That means we're getting very close to having a prioritized project list. The public outreach and funding constraints and opportunities step is wrapping up in the next month. Public comment is scheduled to close on Monday, September 21st, and staff anticipate needing 2 weeks to compile and review all of those comments and being able to share it with the elected officials. The funding opportunities and constraints analysis is scheduled to wrap up next month, with staff focused on developing detailed cost estimates for the projects that were ranked highly during public outreach. Digging in a bit on details right here, the top 37 project corridors included 120 individual projects in 5 sub-areas. During public outreach, staff are seeking to understand what project and project corridors are a high priority for each sub-area. Additionally, we want to learn what projects residents and businesses felt were missing. So we're compiling a list of all the projects that are not included in those 120. The feedback received from the many outreach strategies we've compiled and reviewed to inform the development of that prioritized project list. The number of projects on the prioritized project list is dependent on the size of the capital budget. The next part of the presentation will provide more details on the capital budget. The funding constraints and opportunities task include an effort to understand the transportation need encompassed by the 120 projects on the top 37 project corridors. To that end, planning level cost estimates were completed for the top 37 potential project corridors. The total costs of the projects are exceptional and above the current capital and forecasted budget. There are many competing needs in the city, from police to parks to many others. Maximizing outside funding opportunities is going to be a critical part of developing the prioritized project list. As staff move to the final task in project development, there are 5 implications that staff will be using to guide development of the prioritized project list. As stated earlier, the number of prioritized projects is greatly dependent on the capital budget. The reality is not all top tier projects can be funded, and the prioritized list will need to be developed strategically to maximize funding, specifically outside funding sources. Feedback from the public is a critical input into developing the prioritized project list. Lastly, the project list, both the prioritized and the visionary list, will need to be nimble to respond and react quickly to changes in grants and outside funding sources. As staff look towards finalizing the project list and the TMP at the end of the year, I wanted to give background on the relationship between the TMP and the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. The TMP is a long-range transportation plan that has a 20-year planning horizon. As funding is identified, projects are moved from the TMP to the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. The TIP is the short-range transportation plan with a 6-year planning horizon. Staff will be back in the coming months and years to discuss projects as they come up for consideration. The last part of the TMP update is the financial plan. The financial plan has 2 divisions. The operating, maintenance, and rehabilitation side is mainly programmatic, with budget set-asides for certain tasks such as roadway preservation and ADA improvements. Revenue sources for this division range from steady to declining. The other division is funding to build capital improvement projects plus some grant-eligible preservation projects. The capital improvement project list is the part of the TMP that internal and external stakeholders are most familiar with. Many of these funding sources are more volatile than operating, maintenance, and rehabilitation revenues. For tonight's discussion, I will be focusing on the capital project budget. As alluded to in the project development part of this update, the prioritized project list needs to reflect the forecasted capital budget. As part of developing the prioritized project list, staff are being creative about funding sources and exploring partnerships to ensure the projects match the criteria of the revenue sources. In addition, staff from Economic and Community Development and Public Works have begun discussing an update to the transportation impact fees. The capital projects budget includes 4 types of revenue sources: B&O tax, grants and appropriations, local improvement districts or LIDs, and transportation impact fees or TIFs. I'm going to go over the historical information and the forecast for each of these sources. B&O revenues are utilized to match pavement preservation grants or to fund preservation components of capital projects. The 76 road raising project is a good example, as B&O was used to match a Transportation Improvement Board grant, or South 212th Street, where we will match a federal grant to repave the street next summer. B&O revenues dedicated to street maintenance and or capital funding are roughly anticipated to be between $3 and $3.5 million per year. Grants can be federal, state, local, or a combination of these. Each of the grants have very specific criteria for scoring projects and awarding funding. Appropriations from the state are usually associated with some sort of lobbying effort. The big takeaway on grants and appropriations is they're very competitive. Staff resource intensive, and success is not guaranteed. Historically, Kent has done well winning grants, and based on the last 3 to 5 years, the capital budget forecast for grants and appropriations is between $2 and $4 million a year, but this is not guaranteed. There will be years below $2 million, and there will be other years that are above $4 million. Local improvement districts, or LIDs, are a means of assisting benefiting properties in financing needed capital improvements through the formation of special assessment districts. Special assessment districts permit improvements to be financed and paid for over a period of time through assessments on the benefiting properties. Not all projects will be a good fit for financing via an LID. There needs to be a clear, definable benefit for the adjacent property. Based on the preliminary review of the 37 project corridors, staff anticipate between 2 and 4 LIDs over the 20-year planning horizon of the TMP. The revenues for LIDs are heavily dependent on the project. The anticipated revenues will be developed after the prioritized project list has been developed. For historic context, over the last 5 years, the revenue from LIDs is approximately a total of $2.5 million or $500,000 per year. Transportation impact fees are one-time charges paid by new development for capital projects that add capacity for growth and are located within the right-of-way of streets and roads. The city's current TIF was implemented in 2011. From 2012 to 2019, the years where TIF was collected for a full 12 months, the average TIF collected was 1.17 million. The TIF revenues have increased every year. Due to the economic impacts of COVID, this trend is unlikely to continue into 2020. Staff in Economic and Community Development and Public Works have had initial conversation on updating the transportation impact fees. At the last City Council workshop, a comparison of the TIF rates charged by our neighboring cities was requested. The 2020 Kent rate of $5,097 is higher than some cities, but also significantly less than other cities. One note on this list, Federal Way is anticipating and updating their TIF rate later this year. Staff prepares 3 scenarios based on the rates of other Puget Sound cities to determine the potential annual TIF contribution to the capital budget. For all of the scenarios, development in downtown and Midway were assigned a lower rate than development in the rest of the city. The first scenario is the existing conditions. If the current codified rate of 30% was retained, staff anticipate the TIF generating between 1.3 and 2.5 million per year. The second scenario increased the TIF's rate to about $6,200 per trip, the average of peer cities around us like Des Moines. At this rate, staff anticipate the TIF generating between 1.5 and 3.0 million per year. This third scenario increased the city's TIF rate to $7,200 per trip, the average of all cities in the Puget Sound region with a higher rate than Kent, minus an outlier of Sammamish that is excessively higher than everybody else's. At this rate, staff anticipate the TIF generating between 1.8 and 3.5 million per year. The difference in the annual revenue is rather small between the 3 scenarios.
April, can I pause for just a minute? I see that Councilmember Larmer has her hand up, and I don't want to get too far through the presentation.
Perfect.
Yeah, and April, let me know if it's a better time to, if I should save this question till the end, but this is actually going back to the public outreach. In the slide that was talking about the priority projects based on the feedback we were getting. Yeah, this one here.
Okay.
So I'm concerned, obviously we're not seeing a lot of West Hill, and I'm just wondering what the penetration of outreach was. I mean, I recognize we have more residents on the East Hill, but I'm just concerned about, do we feel like we've done an adequate job reaching the West Hill residents, and do we need to?
That is a great question. So as part of the survey, similar to what we did last fall, we include a question asking what neighborhood or area of the city you live in. That data is being reviewed now. So I don't have an exact number of response from West Hill. However, we noticed the same thing in West Hill. So I'll be talking to the neighbors of West Hill Neighborhood Association on Thursday night to try to get more comments from the West Hill to try to fill that gap.
Thank you. That was my only question.
All right, to get to kind of the crux of the capital budget. So based on the annual revenue for B&O tax, grants and appropriation and TIFs, so no, we don't yet have LIDs, the anticipated annual capital budget for this TMP is between 6.3 million and 11 million. LIDs will be added once we have a better sense of which projects are rising to the top and have a higher priority based on public outreach, and we'll be determining which projects are a good fit for LIDs. The difference between the annual capital budget and the annualized cost of the top 30 projects is exceptional. And again, it's above the current capital and forecasted budget. As staff review comments from public outreach efforts and use feedback to develop the project list, the interdepartmental team will need to be strategic to ensure that the capital budget revenue sources are maximized, especially external sources. There were a couple of existing and potential new funding sources that we reviewed at the staff level as well. So what do we do from here? Ooh. So one thing is the outreach doesn't end until September 21st, and staff and the consultant team are feverishly calling and emailing every day, trying to get more input into the survey and to the web map so that we have a better representation of the priorities from Kent residents. The good news is Josh Mosberg and Josh Gonzalez from Multimedia are doing an exceptional job on outreach and materials, and we're seeing big jumps every day on the survey. So that is great. We're also going to focus on getting a summary of that outreach and coming back to the City Council to give that update on what we heard based on all of the sources. And the big one is we're going to be developing that prioritized project list based on the parameters of that capital budget I just went through and based on what we're hearing from feedback from the public. In addition, in order to understand kind of the cost right now, we have planning level costs, which are more along the 10,000 foot level. We're going to be detailing these cost estimates for those prioritized projects to understand where in that capital budget continuum that we fall based on the high priority projects. And I am hoping to bring that to the City Council to one of the Committee of the Whole meetings in October. And I will gladly take any questions.
Thank you, April. Councilmember Boyce, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, good job on the public outreach. I really think you guys are doing a phenomenal job. Then my other question was related to what Marley was asking, is that once we get that list together, as a council, do we have input in that final list? Because I was thinking the same thing Councilman Long was thinking, just the fact that West Hill seemed to be not well represented, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to be able to make sure that West Hill is represented.
Absolutely. So what staff will be doing is we'll be going over and compiling the outreach and what we heard from all the sources. And we'll be coming back to you with a draft project list. It's not the final. And this will really be based on what we heard in outreach, fitting the budget that we have to understand what those high priority projects are. In the end, not all high priority projects are going to be able to be funded. It is the reality of the funding available. But you will have a very big opportunity, and I welcome it to comment on what we heard and the prioritized list that staff comes up with.
And just one follow-up question, April. I know sometimes people just don't respond to survey, and historically, I'm not sure how well West Hill have done on response to survey and so on. So do you have any historical knowledge regarding how West Hill responded to some of these here, and what we could do to I know we got a ways to go before we end the survey, but how we continue to make sure we reach out to that community?
So there's a couple things that we could do. One of which I'm going to be going to the neighborhood council, and hopefully it's a pretty good turnout, and I'm able to kind of hear from multiple residents of West Hill on Thursday night. But also another thing we can do is do more targeted ads on Facebook that really targets residents of West Hill of Kent. You would do that likely through a zip code or something along those lines. I need to work with Josh to understand what my options are, but that is definitely an option that we can pursue.
Okay, thanks, April. Another fine job, and thank you very much. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you. Great suggestions. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. There's also a Cambridge meeting. So there's two neighborhood meetings coming up on West Hill that we'll be sure to, because I'll be at those meetings also, be sure to mention that. But also it'd probably be good to repost that information on Nextdoor. That's someplace else that people look from time to time. So the information about the survey. So just thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And can you share the information on when the Cambridge meeting is? And I'll reach out to them and see if they have space on their agenda for me to talk for a couple minutes.
Yes, in fact, I'll go on and email that to you once this meeting is done before the next one, so that, because I don't want to leave this screen and, the calendar thing, but I will make sure I email that to you this evening.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Fincher. Councilmember Michaud.
Welcome.
Thank you, Council President. April, I'm wondering if we are going to do any other demographic analysis. I know we've talked about West Hill and East Hill, but what about looking at race and making sure it's representative?
We are doing that as well. So one of the pieces of the survey includes asking where people, what area of the city they live in, and there's also demographic questions in there. Today and tomorrow we'll be pulling that and doing a more targeted outreach for places we see as gaps, similar to the effort that we did last year.
Great. Any other questions or comments for April about where we are with this so far? All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Thank you again, April, for another great presentation, and thank you to all the council members for your comments and your suggestions. Hopefully that gives you a few things as you move on through your next steps, April.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'm always open. If you have any comments, please feel free to reach out by email or cell phone, or I can set up a virtual meeting if you prefer that avenue. I'm always open to it. Just let me know.
Thank you. We look forward to hearing back from you at an October committee meeting. All right, looking at the workshop agenda, that brings us to the end of our presentations. So that gives council members a little bit of time in between this and coming back to council at 7 p.m. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you all back here shortly.